Sometimes the people we sacrifice everything for are the ones who push us off the edge. For 11 years, I gave up my life to raise the granddaughter who never saw me as a mother. I gave her everything: shelter, stability, even love. And yet, what I got in return was resentment and betrayal. But the day she told me to stop giving my opinion was the day everything changed. This isn't just a story of family. It's a story of pain, survival, and silent revenge. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. They say grief has stages, but no one tells you how long each one lasts. For me, the shock never really ended. It lingered like a fog, especially on cold mornings, the kind where the house feels too quiet. That morning was exactly like that, 11 years ago. I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping burnt coffee from my favorite mug, when I got the call that would change my life forever. My daughter Claire was gone. A car accident. One of those pointless tragedies you read about and think, that won't happen to us. But it did. Claire had always been wild, unpredictable, the kind of woman who chased freedom even when she had a child at home. She was 27 and still figuring herself out, but I loved her fiercely. She left behind her daughter, Laura, my granddaughter, just 9 at the time. I remember picking Laura up from school that day. Her small fingers clutched my coat, but her eyes were dry. She didn't cry. She didn't ask why her mother wasn't coming. That silence, it haunted me more than any scream ever could. From that moment on, I became mom again, whether Laura wanted it or not. And truthfully, she didn't. She tolerated me. That's the best word for it. I made her breakfast, packed her lunch, paid for her therapy when the school recommended it. I attended every parent-teacher meeting, every Christmas recital. I tucked her in and listened when she had nightmares. Still, she made sure to remind me, especially during the teenage years, "You're not my mom." Every time she said it, a little piece of me shattered, but I'd smile, tuck those pieces away, and keep going. Because that's what mothers, real or not, do. When she turned 16, the rebellion got worse. She started skipping school, lying about where she was going, dating boys far too old. I tried to put boundaries, but every attempt was met with slammed doors and venom in her voice. Still, I stayed. When she got pregnant at 19, I was the one holding her hand at the clinic. The father, some bartender named Chris, vanished the minute she told him. She cried for a week. I didn't say, "I told you so." I just brought her tea, held her when she let me, and told her we'd figure it out. And we did. I became a mother all over again, this time to James. That little boy became my light in a world that had felt so dim. His laugh echoed through the hallways of a house once filled with tension. For a time, I believed maybe, just maybe, Laura would change. She'd find strength in motherhood. I was wrong. While James grew, Laura drifted further. She couldn't keep a job, never lasted more than a few weeks in any role: waitress, receptionist, dog groomer. She had excuses for every failure. Her boss was toxic, the hours were unfair, her back hurt. Meanwhile, I paid the bills. I used what was left of my retirement savings to cover James's private school. I cooked, cleaned, did laundry. When Laura brought strangers home, men who stayed overnight, left beer cans on the porch, or worse, I said nothing. I swallowed my discomfort because rocking the boat would only make the storm worse. But even storms have breaking points. One afternoon, I picked James up from school and found out he had hit another student. It wasn't the first incident. The principal suggested therapy, said he might be reacting to instability at home. My heart dropped. I knew what that meant. That night, I sat Laura down, tried to speak gently. I told her James was showing signs of distress, that something had to change. Her face twisted, like I'd insulted her. "You think you're better than me?" she spat. "You've never even been a real mom. Claire didn't turn out so great, did she?" That one cut deep. Still, I kept calm. I told her we needed to put James first, that I was willing to keep helping. But we needed rules, structure, a plan. That's when she said it. "Stop giving your opinion. You don't get to tell me how to raise my son." For a moment, everything inside me went still. Not because the words surprised me, but because I realized she meant them. I stood up slowly. I didn't shout. I didn't throw a dish or cry. I simply said, "Hey." "Okay," she laughed. "Okay?" I nodded. "I won't say another word about how you raised James, but starting now, I'm done funding your lifestyle. The school tuition is ending. You have 3 months to get a job, find a place, and prepare to support your son." She stared at me like I'd slapped her. I'd never seen her so stunned. "Are you serious?" she scoffed. "Dead serious," I replied, then walked upstairs without another word. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I'd just drawn a line I should have drawn years ago. I wasn't angry. I was done. There's a difference. I knew the next 3 months would be hard, but I also knew, for the first time in over a decade, I wasn't going to let myself be a doormat anymore. I just didn't know yet that this decision would set in motion the most devastating betrayal of my life. I expected resistance, but not denial. Not like that. The next morning, Laura acted as if nothing had happened. She poured herself coffee, scrolled on her phone, and barely acknowledged me. I sat across the table in silence, waiting, hoping, for some sign she understood what I'd said the night before. It never came. 3 days passed, then a week. No job applications, no changes. She still slept in until noon, left dirty dishes in the sink, and spent hours on the phone with that new guy, Brandon. I hadn't met him yet, but I'd heard enough. His voice was smooth, a little too polite, like he was performing kindness rather than feeling it. Laura lit up when she spoke to him, and that terrified me. James, meanwhile, seemed more irritable than usual. He'd snap when asked to do homework, rolled his eyes when spoken to. I found a drawing of his shoved under the couch, a crude sketch of a boy alone in a room crying. I stared at it for a long time. I knew what that kind of isolation felt like. I'd lived it most of my adult life. At the end of the second week, I reminded Laura, gently, that the clock was ticking. I said, "I'm working on it," she muttered, without looking up from her phone. "Have you applied anywhere?" I asked. She shot me a look like I'd insulted her. "Why are you always on my back? I told you I'd figure it out." "You only have 10 weeks left, Laura." She stood abruptly. "Jesus, you're such a control freak." I didn't respond. There was no point. Every word I said became ammunition against me. So I started pulling back, not just financially, but emotionally. I canceled the automatic payments to James's school. I stopped paying for Laura's phone bill. I stopped buying her special snacks from the store. Small things, but symbolic. The fallout came quickly. "You canceled my cell?" she shrieked a week later. "Are you serious? I told you. I'm not funding your lifestyle anymore. How do you expect me to find a job without a phone? I'll give you a prepaid, just for interviews. Use the house number otherwise." She stormed off, slamming her door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. That night, I heard her crying in her room. For a second, my heart softened. I almost went to her. Almost, but I didn't. Because James deserved better. And so did I. Brandon started coming around soon after. He was tall, well-groomed, always wore a button-down shirt, even on weekends, too polished, too careful. He called me Miss Edith, which felt more like a performance than respect. His eyes were cold, but his smile never faltered. "Pleasure to finally meet you," he said, shaking my hand too firmly. "Laura's told me so much about you." I nodded, watching him closely. Likewise, they whispered in corners when they thought I wasn't listening. James clammed up whenever Brandon was around, his posture shrinking. One night, I heard them arguing in the driveway. Brandon's voice low and hard, Laura's trembling. Later she came in, eyes red. I didn't ask. I wanted to, but I didn't. I kept my promise. No opinions. Still, I started locking my bedroom door at night. As the weeks passed, the house grew heavier. Like the air was thicker, the walls closer. Laura wasn't applying to jobs. She wasn't trying. She was waiting me out, convinced I'd cave like always. But I didn't. Instead, I found peace in small routines. I took James to the park. I cleaned out the attic. I started writing again, little essays, journal entries, bits of poems I hadn't touched since Claire died. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was reclaiming. Then, with 3 weeks left on the clock, Laura changed. She woke up early, cleaned the kitchen, made pancakes, real ones, not the frozen kind. She even apologized for being distant and asked if we could talk more. "I know I've been a mess," she said one morning, eyes glassy. "But I want to fix things. I want to be better. For James. For you." I didn't trust it. Not entirely. But I wanted to. The next day, she sat beside me on the couch and pulled out her phone. "Brandon's cousin owns a little place in Mexico. A bed and breakfast. He said we can go stay there for a few days. Just us. No stress, no pressure. I thought, maybe we could take a trip, clear the air. I blinked, stunned. A trip? Yeah, just us two. Like a reset. I want you to see how serious I am about changing. Everything in me screamed to say no, but there was something in her voice, maybe guilt, maybe desperation, that tugged at my chest. I agreed, hesitantly. I told her I'd think about it. That night, I found her crying quietly in the hallway, thinking I was asleep. It was the first time in years I saw a glimpse of the little girl I once raised, the one who used to sleep with a nightlight and ask me to read her goodnight moon 3 times in a row. And for a moment, I let myself believe we could find our way back. I just didn't know, not yet, that the trip wasn't a reset. It was a setup. The days leading up to the trip were unusually calm. Laura was different. She was up early, making breakfast before I even came downstairs. She helped James with homework, asked me about my day, even folded laundry without being asked. Every once in a while, she'd pause in the middle of a conversation and look at me, really look at me, as if trying to reach back into some long-forgotten memory of who we were before everything fell apart. I wanted to believe in that change. Brandon didn't come around as much during those days. Laura said he was working on arrangements for the trip, calling his cousin in Mexico, coordinating everything. I stayed quiet, observant. I wasn't ready to let my guard down, but the facade was convincing. Too convincing. The morning we were supposed to leave, Laura seemed nervous. She double-checked our passports, repacked her bag twice, asked me if I felt okay, like she was walking on eggshells but smiling through it. At the airport, Brandon was waiting to see us off. He hugged Laura longer than necessary, whispered something in her ear that made her nod quickly, eyes wide. Then he turned to me and said, "Have a great time, Miss Edith. You deserve it." Something about the way he said that unsettled me. I didn't sleep much on the flight. My body never fully relaxed, and when we landed, I felt an ache I couldn't name, something between dread and instinct. The so-called posada wasn't what I expected. It was quiet, tucked behind high stucco walls with a wrought iron gate, the kind of place that looked peaceful from the outside but too still, too empty. The staff greeted us in Spanish and broken English, overly friendly, smiles too tight. I tried to shake the discomfort, told myself I was being paranoid, that my past had made me suspicious of anything that looked like peace. Laura kept smiling. They said we can relax here, disconnect, no stress. She wasn't wrong about the disconnect. They took our phones, something about limited reception and safety protocol. I hesitated, but Laura assured me she'd asked for it. So we're not tempted to check email or get distracted. Something didn't sit right. Later that evening, I asked to walk outside the property, stretch my legs. They said no. "For your safety," the man at the front desk said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Laura brushed it off. "Just rules, Grandma. Probably local crime or something." By the second day, they asked me to attend a wellness consultation. I assumed it was part of the retreat experience. When I got there, the woman behind the desk pulled out a file with my name on it. That was the first real red flag. The folder had my birth certificate, medical records I didn't recognize, and a signed form, allegedly from me, requesting voluntary admittance for psychological care. I stared at it, heart pounding. "This isn't mine," I said, my voice cold. The woman looked at me, unfazed. "You've been under stress. Sometimes memory lapses are common." I stood up, trying to leave, but the door was already shut, locked. That night, they moved me to a different room, smaller, bars on the window, a nurse outside the door. I didn't see Laura again. The days that followed blurred together. They drugged me, not heavily, but enough to keep me off balance. I learned to swallow water, but hide the pills in the corner of my cheek. I pretended to be groggy, cooperative. I smiled when they watched and kept quiet when they asked questions. But inside, I was screaming. They told me I'd been confused, that I'd suffered from delusions, that I'd signed documents voluntarily in the US before leaving. They showed me photocopies of signatures that looked like mine, talked about episodes, memory impairment, paranoia. I realized then what they were doing. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to erase me. Back home I had assets. A house, retirement funds, a small investment account Claire had left in my name when she passed, and all of it could be accessed by a power of attorney. If I were declared mentally unfit, all they needed was the right paperwork and my signature. And I knew Laura and Brandon were behind it. That realization broke something inside me, but not in the way they wanted. It didn't weaken me. It set me on fire. I bided my time. I played their game. For days, maybe weeks, I don't even know. I followed the schedule, attended their group sessions, smiled when spoken to, and then one afternoon, while in the tiny institutional library, I found a lifeline, an old computer, barely functional, but with restricted access to the internet. I asked to write a letter. To journal, I told them. The nurse nodded, not even looking, and that's how I reached out, not to a lawyer or a hotline, but to Donna Yates, a former coworker from my days as a regional manager. She was the one person I knew would take me seriously. I used coded language, referenced an old office joke we used to share, and dropped enough clues for her to understand I was in trouble. It took days, maybe longer, but Donna got the message, and she didn't ignore it. The day the American consulate representative showed up, asking to speak with me in private, I knew my time in hell was almost over. They fought it. Of course they did. The institution tried to delay, fumble paperwork, claim I wasn't lucid enough to leave, but Donna had already sent documentation. The embassy intervened, and slowly, carefully, they extracted me from that place. When I left, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked out the window of the car and whispered, "You thought I'd disappear." But I wasn't gone. Not yet. And now, I was coming home. Coming home wasn't the relief I thought it would be. When the wheels of the plane hit the tarmac, I expected something like peace, like I'd crossed some finish line and left the nightmare behind me. But that's not how trauma works. You carry it in your spine, your stomach, your breath. It walks beside you like a second shadow. The customs agent barely looked at me. I don't blame him. I was thinner, pale, and hadn't slept a full night in weeks. My hair had more gray than before, and my hands trembled when I reached for my passport. The address I returned to wasn't my home anymore. Not legally. Donna had arranged for me to be picked up by a lawyer she trusted. He handed me a thick envelope filled with documents, his eyes soft with pity. "Miss Campbell," he said, "I need to prepare you. They've done a lot in a short amount of time." I nodded, even though I wasn't ready. My bank account had been drained. My house, the one I'd raised Claire in, then Laura, then James, had been sold. My car was gone. All under a forged power of attorney that Brandon and Laura had filed with a notary using my driver's license, the one they took from my purse the night we arrived in Mexico. "They even sold some of your furniture," the lawyer said carefully. I didn't speak for a long time. I just looked out the window and asked him to take me somewhere quiet. He brought me to a women's shelter downtown. Not because I had nowhere to go, Donna had already offered her guest room, but because I needed the quiet. I needed to be anonymous, and I needed to think. I hadn't allowed myself to feel anger. Not fully. In Mexico, I had focused on survival. Now, in that tiny room with a stained ceiling fan and a cot that creaked when I exhaled, I let it in. I cried for Claire. I cried for James. And then I cried for myself. Not because I was broke, but because everything I had sacrificed, every compromise I'd made to keep Laura afloat, to protect her from the world, had been used as a weapon against me. I spent 2 days in that shelter before Donna came with new clothes, a laptop, and a burner phone. "It's time to fight," she said. I nodded. The first thing we did was hire a forensic document analyst. Within days, he confirmed what we knew. The signatures on the power of attorney were forgeries. The medical records used to justify my treatment were fabricated. Some pulled from my past, others completely falsified. The notary who witnessed the documents? Under investigation already for other fraudulent activity. Brandon and Laura had created an entire legal illusion, and it had almost worked. We filed a lawsuit, not just civil, but criminal. Fraud, financial abuse of an elder, identity theft, conspiracy. They didn't even deny it when the police showed up. Brandon was arrested first. He folded under pressure, told investigators that Laura had pushed him into it, that it was her idea, but his trail of emails and voice messages said otherwise. He had handled the logistics. He had contacted the clinic in Mexico. He had moved the money. Laura was arrested a day later, outside a nail salon. When the officer read her rights, she didn't cry. She just looked annoyed, as if I were the one who'd betrayed her. The trial didn't take long. The evidence was overwhelming. Wire transfers, Notarized lies, even voice recordings Donna had helped me recover from old voicemails Laura left on the home line. They were both sentenced, not just for the financial crimes, but for unlawful confinement. The fact that I had been held against my will in another country added weight to the charges. Laura got 5 years with a possibility of parole after 3. Brandon got 7. And James? James had been staying with a temporary foster family while the case unfolded. I hadn't been allowed contact, not until the court reviewed everything and determined I was mentally and emotionally fit to take him back. I'll never forget the day I stood before the judge, hands trembling, and asked to be his guardian again. I brought everything: old report cards, photos, notes from his teachers, letters he wrote to me when he was little. I even brought the stuffed bear he'd slept with until age 6. I don't want to replace his mother, I said, but I want to give him something she couldn't: safety, stability, and love that doesn't come with a price. The judge granted me full custody that afternoon, and just like that, I was a mother again. James was quiet when he came home. He didn't ask questions. He just hugged me, hard and long, and whispered, "I missed you." I didn't let go for a long time. We started fresh, in a smaller house in a different part of town. I bought secondhand furniture, clipped coupons, learned to stretch $1 the way I hadn't done in decades. It didn't matter, because I had him. Every morning, he'd sit across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Laura once sat, eyes cold, and smile through a mouthful of cereal. And every night, I tucked him in with the same words I'd once whispered to Claire. "I'm here. I've got you. You're safe." But safety, I knew now, didn't come from locks or alarm systems. It came from truth, from choosing peace over fear, from never, ever letting someone convince you that love should cost your dignity. And I was just beginning to reclaim mine. The house we moved into wasn't much to look at, a single-story rental with cracked stucco and a crooked mailbox. But it was ours, or at least it was mine and James's. And after everything we'd been through, that meant everything. There was a lemon tree in the backyard that reminded me of my childhood in California. The first week, James and I picked a few and made lemonade from scratch. It was too sour, but he loved it. Said it tasted like sunshine. I remember laughing, really laughing, for the first time in what felt like years. Still, I didn't relax. I was watching everything, every behavior, every reaction. James had been through a trauma too, more than he could understand at his age. One night, I found him standing in the hallway, wide-eyed, holding the blanket he used to sleep with as a toddler. When I asked what was wrong, he whispered, "Is Brandon going to come back?" I dropped to my knees, held him close, and said, "No, he's gone. No one's going to hurt us anymore." He nodded, but didn't say anything. The next day, I enrolled him in a new school, public this time. We couldn't afford private anymore, but I picked a place with kind staff and a good counselor. I met with his teacher personally, explained that he might need extra support. She nodded and placed a hand on my arm. "You're doing an amazing thing," she said. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But there were days I looked in the mirror and saw only failure. A woman who couldn't save her daughter, who'd raised a granddaughter that betrayed her, who had to rebuild her life from dust and memory. I journaled every night, something I picked up while locked in that place in Mexico. It helped me organize the mess, remind myself I was still here. Then one morning, something happened that shook me. I was cleaning out old boxes from the storage unit, the last of my things that Donna had managed to salvage before Laura and Brandon sold off the rest, when I found a sealed envelope with Claire's handwriting on it. I stared at it for 10 full minutes before I opened it. The paper was yellowed, creased in 4 neat folds. I recognized the floral stationery. It had come from a set I gave her for her 21st birthday. It wasn't a long letter, but it was enough to crack me open. She wrote it just a few months before her death. She never mailed it. Maybe she meant to. Maybe she changed her mind. I'll never know. In it, she confessed that Laura wasn't planned, something I already knew, but the truth was harder. She had considered giving Laura up, said she'd felt overwhelmed, alone, unsure of what kind of mother she could be. "I was never strong like you, Mom," she wrote. "And Laura knows. She feels it. That distance. I see it in her eyes, and I don't know how to fix it." She went on to say that she always knew I'd step in if something happened, that I was more of a mother to Laura than she had ever been. I just hope one day she sees that. I folded the letter and held it to my chest. It didn't make the betrayal easier to swallow, but it gave it shape, gave her shape. Claire, the daughter who always seemed to drift away from me, but somehow still knew how deeply I loved her. And Laura, she had inherited more than just Claire's eyes. She had inherited her pain, her confusion, the legacy of women who never quite learned how to receive love without destroying it. Maybe that was my fault. Maybe I hadn't been enough. Or maybe I had tried too hard to be everything, and in doing so, left no room for her to become herself. That night, I placed the letter in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't show it to James. Not yet. He was doing better. He was drawing again, talking more, asking questions like, "Do you think Mom will ever come back?" And "Did she love me?" I answered with honesty and care. "She loved you in the way she knew how," I told him. "But sometimes people have their own pain that gets in the way. It doesn't mean it was your fault. It never was." He nodded slowly, and I watched something in his shoulders soften. We were healing, slowly, like old wounds learning not to ache with the weather. Still, part of me couldn't let go. Laura was still in prison. I hadn't written to her, hadn't answered the one letter she sent, an apology full of vague remorse and a request for updates on James. I kept it in the same drawer as Claire's letter. Some nights, I'd lie in bed and wonder what kind of woman Laura might have been, if things had been different, if Claire had lived, if I had been tougher, softer, if love had been enough. But those were questions that didn't change anything. What I knew now was this. I had survived betrayal. I had survived exile. And I had walked through the fire, not with rage, but with resolve. Laura may have tried to erase me, but I was here, and I wasn't done yet. Time passed in strange ways after the trial. Some weeks felt like a blur. School lunches, therapy sessions, grocery lists. Others stretched on endlessly, especially when the silence in the house reminded me of all the things we'd lost. James adjusted faster than I expected. Children are resilient in ways adults rarely are. He started making friends, laughing more. His teachers sent home notes praising his progress. But I still caught him staring out the window sometimes, lips pressed tight, as if trying to remember something without words. He didn't ask much about Laura after that first wave of questions. He accepted that it was just the two of us now. I, on the other hand, couldn't help but think about her every day. She was in prison, and I couldn't decide if that thought brought me comfort or shame. There were moments, brief, unsettling moments, when I'd open the drawer where I kept Claire's letter and Laura's, and I'd just sit there, staring at both, wondering how everything had spiraled so far, how 3 generations of women in my family had failed each other in such specific, painful ways. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. It was a collect call from the correctional facility in Phoenix. I froze. James was upstairs. I stared at the receiver until the operator repeated, "Will you accept the charges?" I said yes. Laura's voice cracked as soon as she said, "Grandma?" I didn't answer right away. I could hear the echo of her breath, could almost picture her, in a sterile room, hand gripping the plastic phone. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from," she said, "but please, I just wanted to know how James is." I stayed silent. "I think about him every day," she continued. "I know I don't deserve anything, but I needed to call, just to say I'm sorry." There it was again, that same remorse from her letter. Careful, measured. It didn't feel rehearsed, but it didn't feel whole either. "You didn't just hurt me, Laura," I said quietly. "You tried to erase me." "I know," she whispered. "I was desperate. I was stupid." Brandon made it all sound so easy, like no one would get hurt. I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You really believed that?" "No," she admitted. "But I wanted to." The line went silent for a moment. "I didn't know how to be a mother," she said. "I barely knew how to be a person, and I hated that you were better at it than me." There it was, the truth I'd waited so long to hear. Not a justification, just pain. "I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness," she said. "I just wanted to hear your voice, that's all." I didn't tell her that I had Claire's letter, that her mother had written something almost identical years before her death, that this cycle of abandonment and resentment had been looping long before Laura ever picked up a pen, or Brandon ever whispered his poisonous ideas into her ear. Instead, I said, "James is safe. He's happy. He's okay." She cried then. Soft, muffled sobs. I didn't join her. "I'll write if that's okay," she said. "I'll read it," I replied. "No promises beyond that." When the call ended, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in around me. Later that night, I sat with James on the couch, a movie playing softly in the background. He leaned into me, his head resting on my shoulder, and I ran my fingers through his hair like I used to when he was little. He didn't know about the call, not yet, but I knew one day I'd tell him. The truth, all of it. He deserved that much. We were building something together, something honest and new, and I wasn't going to let the ghosts of our past haunt us into silence again. The next day, I pulled out a fresh notebook and began writing everything down. My story, Claire's, Laura's, not for pity, not for revenge, but for James, so that one day, when he was old enough to ask the hard questions, he wouldn't have to guess at the answers. He would know exactly who we were and how we survived. The first letter came 2 weeks later, postmarked from the Women's Correctional Facility, plain envelope, smudged ink. I sat with it for hours before opening it, fingers hovering over the seal, like it might burn me. Inside, Laura's handwriting looked rushed, like her thoughts had come faster than the pen could follow. There was no greeting, no "Dear Grandma," just the raw start of something she probably hadn't said out loud to anyone. I've been having the same dream every night. James is standing on the porch, and I'm calling to him, but he won't come to me. He just looks past me like he doesn't see me at all. And then you walk out behind him and he runs to you. That's when I wake up. She went on to describe the prison, the noise, the cold, the gray of it all. She didn't complain, didn't beg. She wrote about a woman in her unit who'd lost custody of 3 children and never got them back. She says it gets easier, the forgetting, Laura wrote. But I don't want to forget. I deserve to remember. At the end, she asked me to tell James that she loved him. Just that. I folded the letter and placed it back in the drawer with the others. James and I were baking cookies that night. He wanted to surprise his teacher for her birthday. He cracked the eggs like a pro and dusted flour on my nose when I wasn't looking. "Grandma," he asked, licking dough from his finger, "do you think Mom's okay?" I paused, watching him. "I think she's trying to be," I said, "and sometimes that's all we can do." He nodded and went back to decorating. I didn't know how much to tell him. What was too much? What was not enough? He was 12 now, sharp, intuitive. I could see the wheels turning in his head when certain things were left unsaid. So I didn't lie, but I didn't give him everything either. Not yet. That weekend, I brought out an old box from the attic, one of the few things that survived Laura's purge of my belongings. Inside were photos from Claire's childhood, her college years, the baby shower I'd thrown when Laura was born. James sat beside me, curious. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing to a picture of Claire, laughing with a milkshake in one hand and sunglasses too big for her face. "That's your mom's mom, my daughter. She looks like Mom." "She does." He was quiet for a moment. "Did she make mistakes too?" I looked at him, startled by the weight of the question. "Yes," I said. "We all did. But she loved you before you were even born. She just didn't always know how to show it." He nodded slowly, then reached into the box again. "What's this?" he asked, holding up a small stuffed animal, a lion with one button eye. "That," I said, smiling, "was your mom's favorite toy when she was your age. She called him Mr. Brave." He held it gently, like it might fall apart in his hands. That night, he asked if he could keep it in his room. I said yes. The next few months passed without much change. Laura wrote every couple of weeks, sometimes pages, sometimes just a single line, always thoughtful, never asking for anything. I didn't write back, not yet, but I read every word. I was still angry, still hurt, but slowly, something inside me was softening, not forgetting, never that, but bending in a way that let me breathe again. Then, one spring afternoon, I received a letter not from Laura, but from her caseworker. She'd been accepted into a re-entry program for early release. With good behavior, counseling, and completion of her vocational training, she'd be eligible for parole in 6 months. I sat with that news like it was a stone in my lap. Could I face her again? Could James? Would she walk through the door and expect forgiveness? A family dinner? Her son? The idea sent a chill through me. I spent the evening pacing, called Donna, who said exactly what I needed to hear. "You don't owe her anything," she said. "But maybe, just maybe, there's something bigger at work here, something generational that needs to end." She was right. I pulled out my journal that night and wrote a single sentence at the top of the page. I am the last woman in this line who will carry this pain. And then I started writing the hardest letter of my life, to Laura, not for reconciliation, not for peace, but to set the terms, the boundaries, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of something new. I didn't sleep the night I mailed the letter. It wasn't long, just 3 pages, handwritten. The first was truth, my truth, not sugar-coated. I told Laura how deeply she had wounded me, that her betrayal wasn't just financial, it was emotional, ancestral. She had dragged the weight of our family's generational silence into a whole new darkness, and she had done it with her eyes wide open. The second page was history. I told her about Claire's letter, the one she never sent, the daughter who feared she couldn't love enough, who knew that one day I would be the one left holding the mess. And the third page, that was the future. I told her James was doing well, that he was growing into a young man with a soft heart and sharp eyes. I told her he was asking questions and that I was answering them, honestly, gently, with care. I told her that I wasn't promising forgiveness. That I hadn't forgotten, but I was willing to talk, if, and only if, she understood that this time it would be on my terms. 2 weeks passed, then 3. Then one Tuesday morning, while James was at school and I was folding laundry, the phone rang. It was her caseworker. "She received your letter," the woman said. She cried. She started attending trauma-focused therapy sessions in the facility. She's working through it. I swallowed hard. "Has she asked to see me?" "No. She said she doesn't want to push. She's waiting for you." That stopped me cold, because for the first time in years, Laura wasn't demanding anything. She wasn't manipulating or pleading. She was waiting. And that was new. Over the next months, we exchanged letters, carefully, cautiously. There were no declarations of love, no sudden breakthroughs, but there was honesty. There were memories, sometimes shared, sometimes corrected, sometimes mourned. She told me about her cellmate, a woman who taught her how to knit. She told me she'd started volunteering in the prison library, helping women write resumes. She said she had read Claire's letter 10 times and kept it tucked in her Bible. I told her about James's art project, the one where he painted a family tree and asked if he should include her. I told her I said yes, because no matter what she'd done, she was still his mother. And then, one day, the call came. "Edith," the caseworker said, "Laura's been granted early release." I felt the air leave my lungs. She's eligible for the re-entry program in 6 weeks. She'll live in transitional housing, have a job placement and weekly counseling. It's structured, supervised. I nodded, even though the woman couldn't see me. "I'm not ready to see her," I said. "That's okay. I need time." "That's okay too." James noticed my quiet that night. We were sitting on the porch, him with a book, me with a blanket over my legs, the spring air still holding a chill. "Is it Mom?" he asked. I looked at him, surprised. He shrugged. "You get that face when you think about her." I smiled sadly. "She's getting out soon." He didn't react right away. "Will I see her?" "That's up to you." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I'll never forget. I want to know if she's sorry. Like, really sorry. Not just sorry I got caught." I nodded. "That's fair." He looked up at me. "Will you protect me, if she's not?" My throat tightened. "Always." 6 weeks passed. I didn't go to pick her up. The re-entry center handled that. She didn't ask me to come. We'd agreed, slowly, silently, to move forward one conversation at a time. The first time we saw each other again wasn't some dramatic reunion. It was a supervised visit at a neutral office. She walked in wearing plain jeans, a gray sweater, her hair longer, darker than before. Her eyes, those sharp, restless eyes, were quieter now. She didn't try to hug me. She just sat down across from me and said, "Thank you for giving me this chance." I looked at her, this grown woman who had once been a screaming teenager, then a distant mother, then a stranger. And I said, "I didn't do it for you." She nodded. "I know. You did it for James." And for the first time, I believed she meant it. We met twice more over the next month, talked about boundaries, about expectations, about time. She didn't push, she didn't beg. Then she asked if James would be willing to see her. I told her I'd ask. When I brought it up to him, he sat with it for a few days. He didn't rush, and when he finally said yes, I could tell it was something he'd decided on his own. I set the meeting at the same neutral location. Laura arrived early. She looked nervous. James walked in, shoulders tense, hands fidgeting in his pockets. She stood when she saw him, but didn't move. "Hi," she said, her voice cracking. "Hi," he replied, his face unreadable. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded. Then he pulled something from his backpack, a drawing he'd made. It was a tree, just like the one from his school project. But this time it had roots, deep, tangled, messy roots, and 3 figures standing at the base. A boy, a woman, and another woman, a little apart, but still there. James pointed. "That's you," he said. "Not perfect, but still part of it." Laura cried, and I didn't stop her. Because healing, I realized, doesn't come all at once. It comes like a soft knock at a locked door. And this time, we were ready to open it. Just a crack. After that first meeting, things moved slowly, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Laura stayed in the transitional housing program. She worked part-time at a community bookstore and attended her required therapy sessions. She didn't ask to see James again right away. She didn't try to come over. She didn't even send gifts. And for the first time in her life, she respected boundaries. Every now and then, she'd write a short letter to James, never more than a few lines. She never used the word mommy. She signed them simply as Laura. She told him about the books she was reading, the new skills she was learning, how proud she was of his art. James read every one of them, sometimes aloud, sometimes silently. He'd fold them neatly and keep them in a small tin box under his bed. One afternoon, he came home from school holding a clay sculpture he'd made, a rough, abstract piece that looked like a broken bowl. "It's supposed to represent forgiveness," he said, "like how something cracked can still be useful." I stared at the shape, at the fragile lines through the clay. He had glued it back together himself, golden paint tracing the scars. I felt my throat tighten. That boy, my boy, had more wisdom in him than most grown men I'd met in my life. We didn't talk much about Laura after that. Not in detail. He didn't ask, and I didn't offer. I think we both knew that some things were better handled in pieces, not all at once. But a few months later, just before his 13th birthday, he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Can we invite her? Just for cake?" I didn't answer right away. My instinct was to say no, to protect him, to protect me. But I looked into his eyes, wide, steady, and I knew this wasn't about her. It was about him. He needed this, so I said yes. I called Laura myself, told her the invitation was limited. 1 hour, just the 3 of us, at our house. No surprises, no gifts, no speeches. She agreed without hesitation. She arrived early, standing at the edge of the driveway, holding nothing but a small notebook in her hand. She looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had just grown stronger. James opened the door for her. He didn't hug her, but he smiled, and that was enough. We sat around the kitchen table eating boxed cake with too much frosting. James told her about school, about the soccer team he wanted to try out for. She listened like it was the most important conversation in the world. When the hour was up, she stood and thanked me. Not just for the cake, not just for the visit, for everything. I nodded, not ready to say more than that. She turned to James and handed him the notebook. "This is for when you're ready," she said. "It's not a journal, just stories, memories I wrote down, things I wanted you to know, when you're ready." James took it, tucked it under his arm like it was something sacred, and then she left. No drama, no last-minute tears, just quiet, respectful distance. After she was gone, I watched James flip through the first few pages. He didn't say anything, just sat with it for a while. Later that evening, I found him in his room sketching. He looked up at me and said, "I think she's really trying." I sat beside him and ran a hand through his hair. "I think so too, but I still don't want her to live here. That's not going to happen." "Good," he said, going back to his drawing. That night, I lay in bed with a strange ache in my chest. Not pain, something else, something that felt like release. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't carrying the weight of betrayal or grief or resentment like armor. I was just breathing, free. And that, more than any courtroom victory or confession or apology, was what I had fought for. Peace, hard-earned, quiet, real. Summer arrived like a deep breath after years of holding it in. The days were longer. The light spilled into the kitchen earlier. I found myself opening the curtains wider, letting warmth into corners I'd once kept in shadow. James grew taller that summer, not just in inches, but in presence. His voice deepened slightly. He started writing stories of his own, sometimes silly, sometimes startling in their depth. One day, he handed me a folded sheet of paper and said, "It's fiction, kind of." It was about a boy who lived with his grandmother after his mom disappeared. In the story, the mom didn't come back, not physically, but the boy remembered her smile. He forgave her in a dream, and he woke up with lighter shoulders. I cried in the laundry room so he wouldn't see. Laura was still in her program, still working at the bookstore. We exchanged letters maybe once a month. James wrote back on his own now. I never read what he wrote. That was their space, their rhythm. One Saturday, while cleaning out the garage, I found an old storage bin I'd forgotten about, one of the few Laura hadn't sold off. Inside were baby clothes, old tax forms, some jewelry of Claire's, and a stack of unopened envelopes marked confidential. I recognized the return address instantly, the hospital where Claire died. I sank to the floor and opened the top one with trembling fingers. It wasn't medical records. It was a letter, dated 6 weeks before the accident. My hands shook as I read the first line. Dear Mom, if you're reading this, something went wrong before I had the chance to say it myself. It was Claire's handwriting, rushed, a little messy, written on the back of hospital notepaper. She'd been sick, that much I already knew. Some chronic fatigue, unexplained dizziness. But what I didn't know, what no one ever told me, was that she'd been going through tests alone. She didn't want me to worry. Typical Claire. The letter was full of confessions, not just medical ones, emotional ones. Raising Laura broke something in me I didn't even know could break. She came from a place in my life I've never really spoken about. A man I don't even know anymore. It wasn't love. It was desperation and guilt. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. You stepped in when I couldn't, and I never said thank you, but I watched. I saw you loving her the way I didn't know how, and I hated that I couldn't do it, but I also felt relief. Because at least someone could. She ended with something simple. If I don't make it, and if she ever becomes a mother, please help her, even if she doesn't want it, even if she pushes you away. She doesn't know how to accept love, but you do, and maybe that will be enough. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it, pressed it against my chest, and wept in that dusty garage until the sky turned orange. For years I thought I had failed Claire, that I hadn't done enough, that I'd loved her too hard, or maybe not enough. But this was her reaching out across time, asking me for one last favor. And I had done it, clumsily, painfully, angrily, but I had done it. I'd saved Laura, not by force, not by rescue, but by holding the line, even when it nearly broke me. That night, I showed James the letter. He read it silently. Then he looked at me and said, "She was scared." "Yes," I said, "she was. Just like Mom?" I nodded. "Do you think I'll be scared too?" I took his hand and whispered, "We all are, but you won't face it alone." He nodded and tucked the letter back into its envelope. "I want to keep it," he said, and I let him, because some truths belong to the next generation. And Claire, for all her flaws, her mistakes, her secrets, had left behind the one thing that finally set me free. A reason, a purpose, a path out of the pain. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I stood in that courtroom, watching Laura in handcuffs, her eyes empty of remorse. Now she was standing on my porch. No handcuffs, no guards. Just her, older, softer, holding a paper bag and looking like she didn't know if she should knock or turn around and disappear. James saw her first. He'd been working on a science project in the living room when the knock came. I went to the door expecting a package, maybe a neighbor, and there she was, her hair tied back, a gray sweater clinging to her thin frame, eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name. "Hi," she said. I didn't invite her in. Not right away. I stepped outside and closed the door gently behind me. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said, "but I wanted to try." I studied her face. There were new lines, tension around her eyes, but also something I hadn't seen before. Humility, not the kind that begs, the kind that waits. "What's in the bag?" I asked. She offered it to me. "Lemon muffins. I remembered the tree you used to have. Thought maybe—" I took the bag, not out of kindness, but because it felt like a test, and I needed to see if I could hold something from her again without breaking. We stood in silence for a moment. "He's inside," I said finally. "He's not a little boy anymore." "I know," she whispered. I've kept every letter, every school photo. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. There was no script for this moment, no roadmap. Would you like to come in? I asked. She looked stunned. I stepped aside, slowly, carefully. She followed, her footsteps hesitant like she was walking into sacred ground. James didn't run to her. He didn't cry or freeze. He stood still and looked at her, straight in the eyes. "Hi, Mom," he said. She swallowed hard. "Hi, baby. I'm not really a baby anymore." "I know," she said. "And I'm proud of who you've become." They stood there, not touching, just taking each other in. "I've got a lot to say," she whispered. "I know," he replied. "I'm ready to listen, but I might not be ready to forgive everything yet." "You don't have to," she said. "You never have to." And that was the moment I knew something had changed. We sat together at the table, the same one where so much had been broken. This time, there were no expectations, no pleas, just cautious, human connection. Over the next few months, we took slow steps. Dinners once a week, letters exchanged more freely, conversations about books, movies, memories. She talked more openly about prison, about the therapy, about the women she met there, many with stories just like hers, many who never got out. "I was lucky," she said once over coffee. "No," I replied. "You were loved. That's different." Then one afternoon, while folding laundry, she asked if she could see the letter, Claire's letter. I didn't answer right away, but later that evening, I brought it out, carefully unfolded, the edges worn from years of rereading. She held it like something sacred. Her hands trembled as she read it. And then she cried. The kind of cry that comes from deep inside, the cry of someone who finally sees herself, and everyone who came before, with clarity. "She knew," Laura whispered. "She knew what I'd become." "No," I said. "She knew you were in pain, and she asked me to help you." Laura looked at me, her eyes full of shame. "Why did you do it? After everything?" I leaned back in my chair and breathed, because I decided the pain stops with me. She didn't say anything after that, just nodded, wiping her eyes. The next weekend, James brought home a new project, a family history essay. He asked if he could interview us both. We sat at the table side by side. Laura and I took turns answering his questions, telling stories, some painful, some funny, some unfinished. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even peaceful, but it was ours. Real, woven together not by blood or duty, but by the quiet decision to try again, to break the cycle, to rebuild, one word at a time. 5 years ago, I didn't think this was possible. I remember the first time I saw Laura after she was released. She was standing there, unsure, holding a small paper bag. And in that moment, I wasn't sure what I wanted more, to scream or to forgive. But today, as I sit on the porch, watching her and James talk together in the garden, I realize that sometimes the hardest things are the ones worth fighting for. The sky is warm, tinged with orange and pink as the sun begins to set. The air carries the faintest smell of jasmine from the neighbor's yard. James is laughing, the sound so full of ease that it catches me by surprise. The boy I feared would carry his mother's pain forever, the boy who had built walls around his heart, is now standing beside her, open and curious, his face lit with something close to hope. I can hardly believe it. Laura has changed, not in grand, dramatic ways, not in ways that would make a movie script, but in the quiet, powerful way that true change happens, through consistency, through pain, through time. And I have too. It wasn't just that I'd learned how to forgive her, it was that I'd learned how to forgive myself. For the years I spent holding her mistakes like shackles around my own heart, for the time I spent thinking I wasn't enough, but I was enough. And perhaps most importantly, I was free. I didn't carry the weight of her mistakes anymore. I didn't carry the weight of Claire's guilt. I carried my own choices, and that was something I could live with. Laura sits beside me now, her hands folded in her lap, as she watches James and I talk about his next project. It's strange, how natural it feels, how easy it's become. There's a softness in the way she looks at me now, not with resentment or anger, but with quiet appreciation. "I never thought I'd be sitting here like this," she says quietly. "Not with you, not with him." I glance at James, who's showing me a drawing of a tree he's been working on for school. "You're part of the roots now," he says, pointing to the trunk. "Maybe we both are," I say, my voice thick with emotion. You're both still part of the family, just different. Laura nods. I don't deserve this, but I'm going to show you that I can be better. I'm going to do whatever it takes to show him, and you, that I can try. I smile gently, reaching out to squeeze her hand. I already see it. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows on the porch. There's a peacefulness in the air now, a peace I never thought possible after everything that had happened. I look at James again, his eyes bright with laughter and love. He's not the same boy I once worried about, and maybe, in a way, neither am I. I'm proud of you, I tell Laura. You've come a long way. She swallows hard, blinking away a tear. I've got a long way to go, but I'm willing to walk it. I nod, knowing that's all any of us can do. Take one step at a time. James's voice cuts through the moment. Mom, Grandma, look, I've finished the family tree. Laura and I both stand, walking over to the table where he's spread out his project. The tree is drawn in vibrant colors, branches reaching wide, leaves filled with names. At the bottom, just beneath our names, is a single, bold line. Roots, James says, grinning. Roots that are still growing. Laura and I stand together, looking down at the drawing. It's messy in parts. Some of the branches are bent, some of the names are crooked, but there it is, our family, woven together in a way that none of us could have predicted. And, for the first time in a long time, I don't think about the past. I don't think about the mistakes. I don't think about the pain. I just think about the future we're going to build, together. And as the sun finally sets, I realize that, just like the roots in James's drawing, we are all still growing. And maybe, for the first time, we're finally growing in the right direction. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.